Okay, everybody, I would like to welcome Kristina Driscoll. Welcome, Kristina.
Hi, Brandy.
Hello. So recently I was actually a guest on Kristina's She's Brave podcast, and it was an amazing interview. We have a killer connection. And so today Kristina's going to tell us about her and her experience. So Kristina, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brandy. That was an amazing interview. I'm getting amazing feedback about that. I think that you and I look at the world very similarly. I have never had an addiction to alcohol, but I've had some hard times in my life. And I think that's why this is great that we're connecting today, that we're going to talk about how to get through some of those really hard times. And I've lived a very unconventional life. So, and really, let's just go back pretty far.
Mhm.
I married my college sweetheart, and he was a very, very controlling kind of person. So, I actually got out of that marriage within a year and a half. And that for the first time in my life, I entered therapy. I didn't really know what that was going to be about or like. And the therapist really helped me understand why I picked the person that I picked. And I realized how beneficial therapy was. And it set me off on a journey of spiritual development. I mean, I think I was also searching spiritually, like raised Lutheran, but not necessarily Lutheran now, but always just wanting to find my own path to God. So I spent the next 5 years really digging deep, reading a lot of great books, a lot of great authors like Marianne Williamson, Wayne Dyer. And I think that I came out from that. I was a financial advisor. And I think that what happened was I was in my early 30s. I'd worked a lot on myself. And I think that it had changed me into a much better person, for lack of a better word, or you could say high vibration. You can call it whatever you want. But I went on a hike, and the hike leader was my future husband.
Oh.
Literally, he was leading the hike on Mount Rainier. Huge. Well, yeah, you lived in Seattle, so and I got out of the car, and our eyes like locked. There was this instant connection. It's
Mm.
just unbelievable. Like, and it just, I could just even feel it in my body. There were 12 of us. So I did have to elbow my way through the crowd to get right behind him during the hike. And he was actually kind of hard to keep up with. He was super, super fit. And that's how we met. And it was unconventional from the very beginning, Brandy, because he asked me out for dinner. 4 hours flew by. You know how that goes? Like you meet somebody, you connect. You and I have that kind of connection where like an hour or two will just go by in the blink of an eye. Well,
Mhm.
we had, 4 hour dinner, and I just was like, where did the time go? Like we felt like we'd known each other forever, and we were both financial advisors. We were married within 6 months. Unconventional part is, turns out he was 24 years older than me.
Wow.
And that's obviously a really big difference, even though I couldn't keep up with him on the trail.
Right.
So he was really fit. But I think that that was the beginning of me, because I'd done all that spiritual growth and development and work on myself. I was very in tune with who I am as a person, and I was able to say, this is my person. It might be a little bit out of the box. Oh, and by the way, he was like 1 or 2 inches shorter than me. So there you go, too. And I'm a 5'7". He was about 5'5", five
Okay.
six. And we just knew it was right for us. So, and we didn't care. We didn't worry about what other people thought. And I do think that people sense that, because we were married for 22 years, and before he passed away 2 years ago, and no one ever said, wow, that's a really big age difference. Like, what are you doing with him? Or what, what? No one ever. And I think it's because we owned it. Like we were sure of our decision. We were authentic in our decision.
Mhm.
And people never, when you can live from that place of authenticity, people don't question you. They don't question your decisions.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
They can
Yeah.
just see it, they feel it. And maybe you're
Yeah.
also in a place where you're just unaware of it because you're not one worrying about what other people are thinking because you are totally in line with what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That definitely could be true. There might have been people giving each other looks, but I think we just were not part of that. So it was not part of our reality. I don't know. Maybe that's a really great point,
Yeah.
Brandy. So, we got married and we really wanted children. He had never been married, never had kids, and he knew what he was looking for. And it took him a long time to find me, but he knew when he found me. So we had to go through infertility, and that's kind of a whole nother story, which I don't think we're going to
Absolutely.
get into today. But 4 years later, we had a son, and so we had an amazing first 4 years together. And I'm really, actually, really grateful. It's funny how you look back in life and you think, at the time, like the infertility was super hard, but we also had those 4 amazing years of just the two of us, which I think was really a gift and a blessing with
Mhm.
what came later. So our son was born, and the next 5 years were also amazing. And we were living in a small town in Oregon. We weren't close to any family really at the time, but I had an amazing group of friends, and we life was good until one day my husband and I were out on a date night and looking at the menu. We put our menus down, and he looked across the table at me and he said, "Did we order yet?" And I thought my heart just kind of sunk. Like I knew his mother had actually passed away from early onset Alzheimer's disease. And I knew um, that process was starting for him. And it started like earlier in him than anyone in his family before. So that was really, really hard to deal with. So it was a very, very scary time of my life.
I can only imagine. So right away, you just went right to that thought of like, something's wrong. Because I used to ask that question, but I was intoxicated, but that was not your lifestyle. So very much you
Yeah.
knew like,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. In fact, yeah, it's interesting. Here we are on the sober bartender, and my husband actually didn't drink alcohol. He didn't like the taste of it. So that was definitely not part of the equation at all.
yeah.
Yeah. But he just began to he would like repeat questions and things like that. And really my first reaction, I think, was a bit of a defense mechanism, which was to kind of just be in denial to some extent. So, and I think that's okay. Like I think there's times in our life where sometimes we need more time to process something,
Yes.
and denial sometimes. And with Alzheimer's, 20 years ago, there were not really medications or treatments that worked. Even today, it's very uncertain whether the medications that they put you on for Alzheimer's disease actually work or not. So, um, you know, about 6 months later, we got the formal diagnosis, and it began to sink in, and I was completely terrified, Brandy. Like I lost a ton of weight because I couldn't eat. I
Mhm.
couldn't sleep. I was just kind of tail spinning into something. And literally, when you're not sleeping, you can't really think clearly either.
Yeah.
And my generation, I'm 54, there was still a lot of stigma around asking for help with mental health issues. And so, but at one point I just was like, I have to get help. And I literally walked into the emergency room. And yeah, I walked into the emergency room, and I was hoping, one of my friends, her husband was an ER doctor, and I was thinking, oh, I hope he's not working today because I don't want to, I'm so embarrassed to even be here, but I need some kind of help that I do know. And he was there. So I was in a room with a curtain, and he popped his head in around, and he just said, I want to say to you, obviously I can't treat you because I know you on a personal level, but he said, I'm really, really glad that you're here because what you're going through is so incredibly hard and stressful that in some ways I'd be surprised if you could do this without getting some kind of help. And he said, it's okay. Like, it's okay. The reaction that you're having is actually quite normal and you need help, and that's okay. And it was like the best thing because that's why I always say when I tell my story, like, I didn't start out brave. Like, my podcast is called She's Brave. Ha ha ha. I was not a brave girl.
Yeah.
No,
You
I
didn't
was
think you were brave.
I didn't think I was brave, but I think it's courage is a muscle that gets developed. And as a mother, I also was like, I have to be able to function to take care of my child. And for me, like, I know some people would have just left the marriage and said, I'm not dealing with this Alzheimer's journey. I'm just going to get a divorce, whatever, I'm going to move on. And that wasn't an option for me either. It just didn't, that's just not me. So I was like, I have to get through this journey. I need to be present for my son. So that means in this case, getting some medical help from medical doctors and going to therapy. Like that's what I had to do. And that I just took it like one brave step at a time. Like it was just a tiny bit of courage. Like it started out with that tiny whisper of, I'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
literally at the end of the day, I'll get through tomorrow. That's it. Like that's all I can think about. And then I think I just over the years was able to get stronger and more courageous as the journey went on. But I always like to tell people that I didn't start out that way. It really wasn't. And if I can do it, you can do it too.
Well, your courage was born out of desperation, similar to my
Yeah.
own,
Hmm.
because you could no longer go on just doing things the way that you were doing them. So you had to ask for help. So you don't see that as brave. And you and I talked about previously that shame in asking for help. And that
Yeah.
thing that you were afraid of, like the doctor that was there, you were afraid of that. And that is one of your greatest like memories from that time. One of your biggest assets, right? Was somebody
Right.
looking at you and going, you're exactly where you need to be. Like it makes sense that
Yeah.
you need help. Thank you for asking for help.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Isn't that funny how, the thing that we're the most afraid of sometimes is the thing that helps us the most? Like,
Yeah,
so interesting, right?
it is. I think we have built-in defense mechanisms like denial and like fear of the unknown. I've learned that like the ego is not always the worst thing, but it's trying to keep us safe. So like what we think we know is our comfort zone. But what we now know is that stepping outside of that, and asking for help or doing something big or making the next move, like that's where we get like the growth and the life. And so,
Yeah.
so tell us more. So you went to therapy, you took it one day at a time. And
Mhm.
how long after his diagnosis did that go on?
I would say a couple of years. I felt like I was living day to day, one day
Yeah.
at a time. I did make some big changes because I think if you are living one day at a time, you are searching for a better scenario. So one thing that did eventually happen is I asked my husband if we could move to a small town called Bellingham, right near the Canadian border, because all of my immediate family was right across the border in Canada. And so they were literally a 45-minute drive away. And he agreed to that. So we moved to this little town, and that way could feel I could get the support that I needed from my family. And it was absolutely wonderful. We moved into a cul-de-sac and there were 14 children. And my son was I think 5 or 6 at the time, or he's 6, I guess. And it just was, we were there for about 3 years. And I look back on my son's childhood as those were some of my favorite years, because I was the house where the kids could come over and build forts and fool around. And we had, the trampoline, the fire pit. We had kids. I'd get them to go into the woods. We had woods behind the house. They would just be a pack of 14 kids roaming around in the woods, building forts, catching rabbits, catching frogs, catching tadpoles in the pond,
Yeah.
just doing a bunch of stuff. And but my husband was never able to really adapt to that environment, because by the time we moved there, he wasn't able to make friends of his own, and he was quite lonely. And so he began to ask and say, I want to be closer. I want to be with my people, because he was all, he was having trouble with speech by then. And I knew that that meant his family. He was the oldest of four, large, very close family. Most of them were in a suburb of Seattle.
Mhm.
So, he moved for me to Bellingham. And then, even though it was so hard for me to leave Bellingham, we moved from Bellingham to a suburb of Seattle, to be really close to his friends and family, or his family. And he was right. They were amazing. They were 100%, supportive. They visited him all the time, all these, siblings and in-laws and nieces and nephews. And it was really, really good for him. But my son was really unhappy there. It's a very tech culture. Most people work for Amazon or Microsoft, and they're amazing people. Okay, these people, my neighbors were amazing human beings. For example, my next door neighbor, he grew up in a tiny town in China, village. He grew up in a hut with a dirt floor, but he was the smartest kid in the village. So he got sent to the best middle school, and then he had to compete. He was the smartest kid there. So, it went on until he got a PhD in America, and he had a great job at Microsoft. But someone like that, he had a son the same age as my son, and someone like that, their mindset is very much of like, you have to be the top of your class, right?
Mhm.
So, they don't know any different, other than in order to succeed, you need to be the top of your class. So this was a very scholastically challenging environment to be in. Very,
Mhm.
very challenging. And a lot of the kids were just kind of, by the time they reached their teens, they were kind of burning out. They were having mental health issues. And so, after being there for a few years, my son came to me. He was 14, I think. He was in eighth grade, finishing up eighth grade. And he was just begging me to go back to Oregon, which was really his true home, where people knew him from the time he was a baby. And he loved it there because we were always going back to visit. And he had 4 suicidal friends that he was trying to help in this suburb of Seattle, because, by the time he was 6 years old, he is my husband didn't know how to use the microwave. He couldn't remember. So my son would just say, hey, dad, let me help you, dad. Here you go. Here's your lunch, and kids are great. Like, they just kind of go along with all of it for the most part. I mean, there's certain parts where he started asking more questions, but I learned to let him ask the questions when he was ready. But long story short, I just didn't know what to do, Brandy. I was kind of, and this is a good part of the story, because this first part of the story, I talk about reaching out to the medical community for help, but this time I reached out for help in a totally different way. I went in my bedroom that night and I prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. And I would say I didn't even ask, I demanded God to give me an answer, because I said, I'm feeling like he really needs to go to high school 6 hours away from Seattle. I can't move my husband, because if I move him, he'll be away from all of his family except for me. And that's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to him, his family, or me. So what do I do? I felt like my son was not doing well in this environment. He was not doing well, and that he would thrive back in this little town in Oregon. And I said, God, I need a clear answer, not just, I need a very, very, very clear answer. And then I just went to sleep and I just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
Next morning, I got up, went out to the mailbox. My neighbor was there. Asked him how his day was going. He said, not good. He said, our oldest daughter, who has, she was in Head Start. She was the brightest kid in the class from the day she started school, bright as anything. He said, she's in the mental hospital. She's been there for a week for depression and anxiety. And she was 16 at the time. And then I was just listening to him, and he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, we're going to move back to Oregon. And I went, there it is. That's
Yep.
it. That's my answer. It couldn't have been clearer. Like, this man is telling me that his daughter is struggling so bad they were going to move back to Oregon, where they were from. And it it was like I knew. So then I thought, well, how am I going to do this? What do I do now? So that night I called my best friend in Oregon, and she said to me, look, like, she was originally from Brazil, and she was very intelligent, and she said, I grew up with lots of friends and family, and I didn't live at home with my mom because she wanted to be a dentist. And so they were always she was living home. She said, in Brazil we do this all the time. She's like, just send him down, end of 8th grade, see how he does. What do you have to lose? Nothing. And her son is my son's best friend, and there was a younger brother. So long story short, he ends up moving down there. Her boyfriend ends up moving in with his son. So there's 4 boys in the house, 4 teenage boys. I mean, he just had a ball. He absolutely was in his glory. He loved living there. I ended up getting a little tiny condo down there. I spent about half time there and half time up in Seattle, and it was very unconventional. And, the easiest thing for me to have done, Brandy, would have been to say, well, this whole thing's going to make me look like a bad mom. I'm sending my kids 6 hours away for high school. What are the neighbors going to think? What are my friends going to think? They're going to, but you know what? I couldn't, I had enough courage in me, that had been developed over all those years to say, hey, I know what's best for me. I know what's best for my husband, my son, and I'm not going to apologize for my behavior, my decisions. This is what I'm doing. And it's not like I went out there, I didn't announce it on Facebook, I didn't tell the whole world. But if I ran into someone at the grocery store, I would just say very naturally, oh, by the way, Will's, we've decided that he was really unhappy here. This was not a good environment for him. So he's down in Oregon for high school. And again, I never had one person question me. Again, maybe I missed the signals. I don't know. Maybe I missed. But, I think when you're so intentional and you're not worried about what other people think, I think that you are really, truly free. If you think about it, if I'm making decisions based on what other people's approval, am I free? No, I am not even free. I'm in a freaking cage. I'm in a cage. So we all need to, and I think as women in particular, we are naturally want to help others. That's just part of, not all of us, but a lot of us. And so we end up compromising ourselves and also trying to make other people feel at ease, which means being that chameleon. Like, a lot of women are chameleons. They're one person with this person, they're another person with this person, to make everybody feel at ease. But guess what? When you're a chameleon, nobody really knows you. You can't have deep, authentic connections. Other people can sense it. Like, when you're not authentic, other people can sense that there's something off about you. Doesn't feel right. The energy doesn't feel right. When you're 100% authentic, people are happy. Like, they're like, this person's energy feels really good. I like being around this person because they're comfortable with themselves. And so, it's not like I pushed that information out there. I just kind of let it get out naturally and didn't worry about what other people thought. And it's such a beautiful way to live. It's such a beautiful way to live when you can just make decisions that are right for you. You're totally free when you don't care what other people think. And as women, that's why I started She's Brave. I mean, yes, I think people think it's about women jumping out of planes, climbing Mount Everest. I'm like, yeah, it can be. I mean, that's obviously a part of being brave, but for me, bravery is so much more than that. And what it is more than anything else is the courage to be yourself.
I love that. And it's so true. It's so true. Like you helped me see that I'm brave because I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm brave. And I'm like, I am absolutely brave. Like you
Yeah.
had to be brave because
Yeah.
you have a couple choices when life gives you circumstances. You do have options. Like you can check out, you can leave, you can wallow in self-pity, you can commiserate and people will listen because you deserve to be just bummed out, right? You deserve to be devastated. But when you choose to be brave and you choose to live the life that you have, like that's where it's at.
Yeah. I had another friend in Eugene actually whose husband was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease around the same time my husband was diagnosed. And we are still like ridiculously close friends to this very day, because we were on a similar journey in that we had sons around the same age, and both of us lost our husbands, and they both had incurable diseases that there was no treatment for. And she and I look at the world a little bit differently than most people, because one thing we've realized is that most people just kind of assume that they're going to live to be 90 and they're going to be perfectly healthy, or 80 or whatever, right? Like, okay, and so I'm going to go travel, or I'm going to write that book, or I'm going to start that podcast. I'm going to do that 10 or 20 years from now. And my thing is, don't wait, because it doesn't even have to be death. It could be disability. It could be, who knows, but like, do the thing you want to do and do it now, because life is precious. And that 22-year marriage with my husband went by in the blink of an eye. And you know on the one hand, but on the other, I also realized how precious life was, and that I wasn't going to waste a minute. I'm not going to waste a minute, and that I'm not going to I'm not going to wait until he passes away to enjoy my life. Like, at some point, I had to move forward. So here's another unconventional thing to tell you about is, yes, there was some resistance in that. I was actually feeling quite sad, and I was kind of stuck, and I was very lonely, because when you're a single parent, super hard. But my husband's family, two different family members came to me at two different times, sat me down. First time I wasn't ready to hear it. Second time I was. And they said to me, life is short. You're a lot younger than Bill is. And it's time for you to get your life back and have some joy in your life, because we see that you're very sad and you're lonely. So, why don't you try to find a companion, someone to do things with, someone to have dinner with? And Bill, you're not going to hurt Bill's feelings. He doesn't know who you are anymore. You're not going to hurt him. So it's not like you're hurting anyone's feelings by doing this. Yes, it's conventional, but please just try. So the first thing I did was join a single parent group, and that was a godsend, and I think, as you know too, because you're in AA, but the power of groups, the power of collaboration, the power of working together, it's incredible. So that kind of lifted me out and allowed me to live life more to the fullest as well. And then um I would say that it's basically, okay, I'm gonna lose it. You're gonna have to edit this part out
You're fine.
because I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Yeah, 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 totally fine. Um, yeah, no, I was gonna say that, yeah, so eventually I did actually create a match profile,
Mhm.
and I wrote my story. So again, I was 100% authentic. I was 100% real. And I said, this is my story. You know, my husband has advanced Alzheimer's. He doesn't recognize me. And I'm I am looking for someone to do things with. And just being that authentic. Like I thought nobody's even going to reach out to me. But that actually was not an issue. And people, you know, men, they loved my story because they said, you're so authentic, you're so honest, and you don't find that very easily these days.
Yeah.
So I did move forward with my life. I met my next husband, Blake, who I just got remarried this summer. And, you know, it's a very unconventional path. And again, I had to not worry about what other people thought. And again, I just would tell them casually if I saw them, oh, by the way, you know, I'm dating again. And again, I never had one person say to me, that's terrible, you know, like, and Blake, he would come visit my husband with me. And my husband, you know, they kind of have this in and out, they kind of go in and out with their consciousness. And he one time he looked at me and he pointed and he said, you. And then he looked at Blake and he said, and you. And he said, good together. I
Oh,
don't know if he knew who we were or not, but he said that. And, you know, it was kind of like him giving his blessing, whether he even was conscious of it or not. And, um, you know, and I think the other thing that helped too, that could really help your listeners, Brandy, is my spiritual path. Like I really, from the very beginning, even back in those days when I was terrified of that diagnosis, I always believed that this was my spiritual path. This might help some of your listeners actually. Like, this is my spiritual path, and I'm just going to accept it and I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to make the best of it. And I am going to live my life to the fullest that I can, because I think any of us on this planet of 7 billion people, we can all make every excuse in the book to not have a good day. There's plenty of opportunity for that. Or we can make a decision to have a good day. It's really that simple.
it unfortunately is. People don't like to hear that, but there are days I don't want to hear my own message. I don't want to hear what you
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
because we
I
sit in our
agree.
shit. And it
Yep.
absolutely, like they say that if you smile, you can trick your
Yeah.
brain into actually thinking
Yes.
that you're feeling good,
Right.
and
You're right.
it works. Or like fake laughing actually
Right.
works, because then you start laughing at yourself. Like,
Oh, you know, it's so funny you're saying fake laughing. I actually interviewed a Canadian woman, Lauren Tatner, a podcaster in Montreal yesterday. She's a laughter therapist.
oh,
And we were just like cracking up the whole interview. Like it started with the fake laughter, but then it was just like, nah, everything was like so funny.
mhm.
It's like great.
It actually works to turn your mood around.
Oh, totally. Totally.
But you have
Yeah.
to be willing to do the fake laugh to get the benefits of the mood turning around. You have to choose. You have to
You have
choose
to
joy.
choose.
You have to choose to have a good day, because if you're relying on everything in the world determining what kind of day you can have some really shitty days. So
Yeah.
you have
Cause
to
you're,
make the decision of like, I get to decide what kind of day I'm going to have. I get to decide that I'm not going to let whatever circumstances happen ruin my day.
mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. And also like you're giving your power away. Like, you know, if you're putting your happiness outside of yourself, you're just giving your power away. And that gets back to the whole authenticity thing that I like to hammer home so often is, you know, if I, you know, my happiness is dependent on me, not on other people's opinions of me, you know?
And that's true all throughout your story, like hearing that repeatedly, because I lived worried about what other people thought. And
Yeah.
I was a mess, and people flippin' loved me. Like I had a tribe, and they loved the me beneath the mess. But I thought that it was like I was just putting on a show and showing them what I thought they wanted to see. And that was true for some of the surface people. But it's like, now I just don't care what people think. I just don't. And I think that the authenticity, like that's where we connect, because we know that we're talking to the person that we're talking to. Like I'm not talking, you're not talking to a shell of me or a version of me. Because today
Right.
I just show up as myself. And that was not the case for me for a long time. I was that person
Wow.
that you mentioned earlier in the interview where I kind of became who I felt my partner needed at the time. Like
Yeah.
whenever
And
I was
as women,
with,
I think we do that. That's part of, I think that's just almost in our DNA to adapt and accommodate. But at the end of the day, I think we're not very happy when we do that. I think people want to know the real authentic us. I think they do. Don't
when
you?
I didn't know the real authentic me until I did some work, like did the, the spiritual searching and
Mhm.
realized what I was looking for.
Mhm.
And it wasn't outside of myself. Like I found it inside myself. And then I aligned with the things that I wanted and needed outside of myself. Because like
Mhm.
you said, I became, that higher vibration. I became that version of me that was actually me, like stripping away the unnecessary things. And so
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Like, I love the fact that you have this podcast because number one, like, let's just talk about hard stuff and put it out there so that we don't feel so alone. Like, people can jump onto your podcast who are struggling with sobriety and they don't have to feel alone. And it's okay. And yet you're like, you're even like, hey, I had a relapse. Like, it's okay. It's all okay. It's all just part of the journey wherever you're at, let's embrace it. Let's just accept it as part of the journey that is incredibly beautiful, that you're helping so many people. And today I know I'm not, your typical guest because I didn't have the alcoholism factor in there, but I do think that we all have different kinds of coping mechanisms throughout different things. And I think that addiction is can show up in a million different ways, which, if you haven't already, you'll be having lots of conversations about how addiction shows up. For me, it didn't show up as alcohol. What it showed up for in me was actually shopping. I had a shopping addiction for a while. And what it was is that if I could go to Nordstrom where everything is beautiful and everything is perfect and everybody's happy, I just needed that, like or at least I thought that that could help me feel better, but it was always a short-term fix. It wasn't a long-term fix,
yeah.
you know?
And that's that hole that we talked about. So for me, alcohol was just a symptom for the hole that I had inside of me. And so for
Hmm.
you, seeking outside of yourself, like just something to feel different, something to
Exactly.
change the way you think and feel. And that's why you totally fit the bill to be on this show, because you know exactly the same pain and suffering that the rest of us do. We just have filled it with alcohol thinking that that was our problem. There's alcohol in hand sanitizer, there's alcohol in cleaning agents. The alcohol is just a substance, it's just a symptom of that hole.
That whole, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So I feel like you're perfect for this show because you've it's the life experience. Like it's that pain point and that, suffering and choosing to live despite every reason not to. And I don't mean like, to end your life, but I mean, to not just experience life because you have a reason, to live in your suffering. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always a choice every day, and I think that's what I realized. I'd done all that spiritual work. And so I realized every day, I know my life is not perfect, but whose life is? I mean, I think that was one thing I figured out too. There were a lot of perfect people around me where I lived, especially in Seattle, but if you dig deep enough, they're not perfect. If you think they're perfect, you just don't know about them because I'm telling you, we all have problems. And if you don't think that someone has a problem, it's just that they're not sharing that with you, you know? In fact, I had a really, really amazing interview about a week ago with a former neighbor of mine in that Seattle neighborhood, because I actually live kind of out in the country now. But and it's just interesting our perceptions of each other, and she I mean, I wasn't very emotionally available. Well, I thought she had the perfect life. So I just thought, she's lovely, she's a beautiful person, but her life is perfect. Come to find out, she was married to a narcissistic abuser for 20 years.
Um,
And the company that supposedly she and her husband had built, she built it 100% herself. And he was just constantly saying, work more, be more, do more, get me more money so I can buy a nicer car. It was just, and then, I had no idea what was really going on with her. And I think every day we wake up, we have a choice. And that's what I realized with my husband. Like, life is not perfect. He's declining with Alzheimer's. At some point, he did have to go into a care home. But I still have my life. So, how am I going to live it today? Am I going to cry? Yes, sometimes maybe.
sure.
But on other days, my son and I are gonna go do something fun today, or we're gonna take a trip. Like, the trips really helped us. And I'm even I'm talking about going to Grand Canyon. It could be overseas, it could be local, it could be an hour away. But I feel like sometimes taking a trip or getting yourself out of your home, out of your environment, allows you to be someone else for a little while and take a break from the hardness of it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in definitely just that. I feel like that stuff feeds our soul. Like, that just reminds us that what's immediately around us isn't all there is.
Right.
Like,
And I
it's
think that's why we did quite a bit of trips, because we needed that reminder that there was a whole life out there beyond just my husband's illness. And that, I just want to make that choice every day, because none of us are ever going to have a perfect life. As much as we love podcasting, every day there are problems, right? Like, there's issues, there's problems, but so are we going to make it a good day and we're going to embrace it and love podcasting and not worry about it? Or are we going to fixate on the problems? Or are we going to fixate on the solutions, right?
Yep. And that's my biggest thing, is solution-based living, right? Because
Hmm.
problems are always there. So I've learned to see them as opportunities to grow. And you and I were having, a non-recorded conversation about just that. Like, there are these challenges in life, and I can look at it and just go, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming, I'm so screwed. Or I can just go, like, this is teaching me so much. There is
Yeah.
so much I'm going to learn from this, and I'm still in
Yeah.
it. And that's
That's
okay.
such a great reminder. And that's really what I was doing throughout my process too. Like, I would say to myself, this is my spiritual path, which was my way of saying, this is teaching me so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And the path is ongoing. And I visualize the path. So for people that are not familiar with the Pacific Northwest, those of us that are, I feel, are very blessed. Like, I never thought about the Pacific Northwest before I moved there. But now when I picture my path, I can actually see a path. I can actually see trees, and I can see that I can't see beyond like the steps in front of me, but I can hear a creek, and like, it's very interesting because you don't know what's coming, from Bend. And like, I walk with my little dog, and she's dog aggressive, so there was like that fear of like, oh gosh, if I go this way, is there going to be 10 dogs that are off leash? It's like, it's the unknown, but it's taking the steps and taking in like the beauty along the way, despite the fact that there might be obstacles, because it's a path, so you just
Yeah.
walk it as it
Yeah.
unfolds.
Yeah. And every day is a gift.
It really is. I have all those little magnets on my fridge, like, today I choose joy, and every day is a gift. And those used to just be things that held up pictures, but now, like, I embody those things today. Like, I fully believe that every day is a gift.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. That's why I'm so glad that you're doing this. Like, your message is so needed in the world. And because there are so many people in the world that struggle with alcohol addiction or any kind of addiction, like what we talked about. We're all dealing with things. And I think that we need to know that we're not alone, that we can get through this. And, that's like one of my big messages too. Ask for help, and that help can be, like, that's why I like to tell a couple different angles, because, asking for help can be in many, many different ways that we can ask for help, right?
Yeah. Family, support groups, therapy. And then, the big one is getting to the point where you get on your knees and you absolutely mean it. And just saying, I need help. And it is amazing what comes from that. Like, that is so powerful because you don't question the answer. You don't go, oh, well, is that? You're like, nope, thank you. That is exactly what I needed to hear. And that happens to me more and more often the more I walk the path. And I
Yeah,
feel, oh, go
there's
ahead.
something, yeah, I was gonna say there's something magical in the surrender, like, in your case, hitting the rock bottom and being like, I have nowhere to go, so I have to surrender. And basically for me, in that question of, what should I do in this parenting decision, and just feeling like I was backed in a corner, like I don't know what the answer is, so I'm going to surrender this. I'm going to surrender this to God, to a higher power, and let go. And it's just like that's really where the magic happens.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the work that you do. If people haven't listened to your podcast, it's just a series of brave women. And it's not, like you said, it's not the bravery of, doing the adrenaline things, but it's the life things. Like, it's brave to show up for your life. It's brave to show up and talk to these people and get their story out there. So I love that we get to be here and we get to hold this space.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like hope
And
is the message. Like, there's hope, there's life.
yeah, yeah. So my podcast is called She's Brave with Kristina Driscoll, Kristina with a K. And I also have a website. It's www.shesbravepodcast.com. You can also find me on Instagram at She's Brave Podcast. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, She's Brave Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristina. And I'm sure this will not be the last time we do this.
Ah, yeah, no, you and we just look at the world the same way.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thanks, Brandy.